This is Stephen at shortseasongarden.com. Whether you live in Zone 3, as I do, or in a warmer climate, one of the first things you will need to decide about vegetable gardening is what method or methods you're going to use. Your grandpa probably had a large traditional garden and had well laid out rows. He made it near a water supply and close to the house so Graham could quickly run out and grab a fresh cucumber or some spinach at lunchtime. The traditional garden with its well laid out rows is not as common as it used to be, especially among organic gardeners, but it still has its benefits. The initial financial cost of a traditional garden is significantly less than that of raised beds or container gardening, especially if you already have reasonably good soil and access to a rototiller. For sure, if you plan to grow large quantities of peas, corn, beans, and other row crops for winter storage, preserving, or to sell at a roadside stand or your local farmer's market, the traditional garden is much more effective than raised beds or container gardening. But despite their low initial cost, traditional gardens do have some serious drawbacks. You need to have the space and preferably some good soil to start out with. If you're planting a huge garden, you really need access to a garden tractor or your neighbor's farm tractor with plow and harrow for initial soil preparation. Weed control is very labor intensive and again requires a rototiller or a lot of hand labor. And you are continually disturbing the microbial activity in the soil with your spade or tiller, and then you are compacting that same soil with your feet. And then when you add well-rotted manure or compost or other soil amendments in the fall or spring, much of it is wasted on pathways. Often modern gardeners don't have the space that Grandpa had or access to land with good quality garden soil. So what should they do? Well, raised beds placed 3 or 4 feet apart with pathways between are the ideal solution. With raised beds, you don't need a tractor or even a rototiller. You don't have the backbreaking work of turning the soil and fighting to keep weeds in check. Even pests are easier to monitor than in the traditional garden. You can make your raised beds low or high, simple or fancy. If your bed is off the ground or has a bottom in it, you will need drainage holes to keep plants from becoming waterlogged. You will want to use a good balance of organic materials such as well-rotted manure or compost, as well as garden soil, lime, and peat. To help reduce costs, you can supplement the mix by screening some of your own garden soil to add to the raised bed. The big negative with raised beds, if you're on a budget, is the startup cost. Vinyl, cedar, and other durable rot-resistant materials are expensive, and good soil is very costly. Also, irrigation is a must in raised beds, and that can be time-consuming to do manually or costly to automate. If you really want to grow a lot of food in a very small space, you can try your hand at intensive gardening, also known as square-foot gardening. This method of planting involves carefully dividing your bed into squares and completely filling the space with meticulously planned vegetation. This handy seeding square is color-coded, giving proper spacing for each type of crop. Use the included tool to poke holes to proper depth, and then use the funnel to plant the seeds. Plan to put quick-growing early crops such as spinach and radish with your large, sprawling squash and cucumbers because they will take over and crowd everything else out. Intensive gardening, especially in Zone 3 and other northern zones, with their long daylight hours takes a lot out of your soil, so lots of well-rotted compost or manure is required. Maybe you have no good soil available and can't afford the startup cost of raised beds. Or maybe you just like to experiment with new ideas. Consider straw bale gardening. Sound crazy? Don't knock it until you try it. Basically, you buy a few bales of straw, add some nitrogen and water to the carbon contained in the straw, and begin rapid composting of the straw from the inside out. It creates an ideal disease-free, weed-free medium for your plants. If you are planting small seeds, you will want to add a thin layer of potting soil to the top of your bales first. Transplants, however, can be started right in your bales. Straw bales are great for tender plants that can't stand the frost. Just put a row cover over at night and tuck it into the baler twine. The heat generated by the composting bales will act as a greenhouse for your tender plants. Just about any crop that you can grow in the ground or a raised bed will grow in your straw bales. The one big caveat with straw bales is that regular watering is critical, so save yourself some work and set up an irrigation system when you start your straw bale garden. Also, plan on purchasing new straw bales each year, or at the most every 2 years. So what to do if you don't have any gardening space at all? Maybe you even live in an apartment with a small patio. You may want to consider a container garden. With good-sized containers, you can grow almost anything that you can grow on the ground. The great thing about a container garden, especially in a short-season climate, is that you can move your containers into a protected area when a frost is forecast. Your imagination is the limit when it comes to picking containers. Just make sure you have plenty of drainage holes in the bottom. Container gardening is probably the least forgiving form of gardening when it comes to irrigation. In hot, dry weather, containers may need watered several times daily, but too much water is as bad as too little. Here's an example of root rot caused by overwatering a patio cucumber plant. If your work schedule makes regular watering difficult, you may want to try self-wicking containers that store extra water for your plants. Whatever method you choose, and whatever your climate, the main thing is get out and grow a garden. There's nothing like the joy of growing your own food. This video gives a quick introduction to several basic gardening methods. For more detailed information, please visit www.shortseasongarden.com. But before you go, make sure you give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and click the notification bell. And above all, whether you live in cool zone 3 or a warmer climate, be sure to grow your own vegetables.